there are definitely moments you've seen in WWE that have left a mark on you forever, whether they were real or part of the script. One way or another, they left a big impact on a large part of the WWE universe. And even though nowadays the company is far from having similar moments, we can't forget that at some point in WWE history, they did exist. That's why I'll stop talking now, and today I'll present to you 20 minutes of shocking moments in WWE. It was the year 2004 when John Bradshaw Layfield and Eddie Guerrero starred in one of WWE's biggest rivalries of the early new millennium. They did it while fighting for the WWE Championship. The Latino Heat retained the title by disqualification at Judgment Day, lost it at the Great American Bash, and the wrestling god John Bradshaw Layfield would successfully defend it at Armageddon. But today we won't talk about a match between them, but rather about a segment that involved both of them. And Erlinda, Eddie Guerrero's mother, in May of 2004, Erlinda, in a segment involving both wrestlers, ended up suffering a heart incident. This program wasn't televised, since it was a live show. Many say that it was John Bradshaw Layfield who caused this after making her get too upset. It was supposed to be just a storyline, but it became real very quickly. Eddie Guerrero started to get really scared and the paramedics came in right away. John Bradshaw Layfield quickly broke character and also started to get scared. After seeing what was happening, Linda was quickly taken to the nearest hospital, and if you look more closely at the minutes before this incident, you can see her holding her left arm. Let's remember that pain in the left arm is a key symptom that warns of this event. Although many blamed John Bradshaw Layfield, it was actually him who held her as she fell into the ring, grabbing her by the arm, obviously without knowing what was really happening to her. On May 2nd, 2005, Chris Benoit would face Triple H on an episode of Monday Night Raw. As expected, the match was very intense, but at a certain moment, Triple H delivered a tremendous blow to Chris Benoit's back. This caused Benoit to suffer a real concussion. His eyes rolled back and Benoit lost consciousness for a few minutes. Triple H, realizing this, decided to stay on the ground and wait for Benoit to recover properly. The Big Bad Wolf left the ring and you could see real desperation on his face. Monday Night Raw would go to a commercial break for a few minutes. And when we came back, we would notice Benoit a bit lost in the Triple H match, not really knowing what had actually happened to him. He hit him fiercely in the back again, and by this point Benoit was already completely hurt. All these injuries are the ones that accumulated over the years, leading to Benoit's tragic end. Let's remember that in those years, there was no policy in WWE to protect wrestlers from physical and brain injuries. July 14, 2008, Monday Night Raw had as its main event Crime Time and John Cena vs Cody Rhodes, John Bradshaw Layfield and Teddy DiBiase. The match had been going on for more than 10 minutes when suddenly John Bradshaw Layfield decided to attack Cena and end the match by disqualification. However, we all thought the match would end there. But no. John Bradshaw Layfield invited John Cena to follow him backstage. Cena had no choice but to follow John Bradshaw Layfield so he could give him the beating he wanted so badly. However, the atmosphere backstage became really strange. John Bradshaw Layfield disappeared for a few minutes, and after a while, John Cena found himself looking for John Bradshaw Layfield in the arena's parking lot. John Bradshaw Layfield suddenly appeared and attacked him with an iron bar. Afterwards, he would place him under the lower part of a car and then he would get into another car to leave. Still, against John Cena, I'm not lying. The arena fell silent at that moment, although in reality it was very hard for all of us to believe this. But I have to say that in those years several people doubted whether this was real or not, including myself. Debbie Long went from being a World Championship Wrestling referee to a World Championship Wrestling manager. Then she went from being a WWE referee to an on-air authority figure in WWE, specifically as the general manager of SmackDown. Many of her segments from the Ruthless Aggression era are embarrassing if we look back now. She was quite a strange character. Well, even though she was a general manager, she always came in dancing to the rhythm of rap. Teddy became quite loved by the public. However, in a storyline where he was supposed to marry Krista Marshall, Teddy Long suffered a heart attack during the wedding ceremony. While there were people in the audience who didn't know what was happening, for the vast majority, it all felt like a soap opera that nobody believed in. It was so unreal and hard not to smile for the fans. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Teddy Long had no choice but to return to SmackDown later after the heart attack. Obviously, the storyline, along with Christian Marshall, was quickly dropped by WWE because no one believed what had happened. The $1 Million Mania was a segment created by Vince McMahon in WWE. With this contest, the goal was to increase the ratings of Monday Night Raw each week. The game consisted of a secret word, or rather a password, appearing each week on WWE. And the only way to win was by answering the phone to Vince McMahon and saying the secret word. A perfect move to keep all the viewers paying attention to Raw. Even one of the people who won the contest was present in the arena. But anyway, that time when Vince McMahon was awarding someone live, part of the set started to fall. Vince looked quite worried, but he kept going when all of a sudden the set where he was standing started to fall. After a few seconds and without understanding anything at all, Vince looked up and the top part of the stage came down on him. Wrestlers who were in the ring had to run as fast as possible to try to help him. Paramedics and production assistants also came to help. Even though WWE went extremely far with this, not many fans completely believed this segment. When Rey Mysterio faced Chavo Guerrero on September 7, 2007 on SmackDown, everyone would think that this match would end in the most normal way. In fact, you know what? It really was like that. Rey Mysterio ended up winning the match against Chavo Guerrero. And obviously, the match had extreme moments since it was a stipulation match. I quit. However, the big surprise for little Mysterio would come shortly after the celebration. When Mysterio realized that the great Khali, who was the heavyweight champion at that time, was approaching the ring. Khali was only after one thing, and that was to crush Rey Mysterio's head, his classic move, which this time made Rey Mysterio end up bleeding from his mouth. In one of the most shocking moments in SmackDown history, the Animal Batista arrived shortly after to try to help him, but it was already too late. Mysterio was in Khali's hands long enough and the damage was already irreparable. Batista, on the other hand, stayed with his friend, and the paramedics arrived at the scene. Rey Mysterio has said that after that segment, many family members and friends wanted to know about him to really check on his health condition. That means this really went to another level. The Latino Hit had an extremely successful career in the United States and in Mexico. In his 18 years as a professional, Eddie managed to win several championships in WWE. Everything seemed to be going well for Eddie Guerrero in wrestling, but in his private life, everything was completely different. On several occasions, he had to enter rehabilitation clinics to deal with his problems with illegal substance abuse, alcohol, and drug addiction. Although WWE and his family tried to help him, there was little they could do about it. For that reason, in 2004, one of the most shocking moments in wrestling history took place. In a match against the Dudley Boys, Guerrero suffered a heart incident in the ring. At first, it seemed to be part of the script, but when his own teammates realized that Eddie wasn't pretending, they had to step in. John Bradshaw Layfield quickly jumped into the ring and covered the Mexican so that the medical team could attend to him immediately. This would be just one of the many warnings that Eddie Guerrero's body was giving him, since Latino Heat would lose his life the following year. If we go back to the Royal Rumble of 2014, we would remember that Punk's participation would mark a before and after in WWE after this match, since that would be his last fight. Before leaving the company for 10 years and above all, leaving quite upset with WWE. However, that night, CM Punk suffered a concussion in the middle of the ring. It happened when Kofi Kingston entered the ring and hit him with a tremendous clothesline after jumping and propelling himself in the air. No one realized that Punk was actually struggling with it. He went straight to the corner and stayed there for several minutes. Punk said that after Kofi Kingston's clothesline, his mind went blank and he didn't remember anything else for several minutes. Concussions happen very often to wrestlers. They have a high rate of being victims of concussions. Unfortunately, Punk was not able to participate normally in the Royal Rumble again. And, even worse, later, Kane would take him out of the ring and deliver a tremendous chokeslam to him on the announcer's table. Many say that WWE shouldn't have allowed Kane to chokeslam him on the announcer's table, because he had suffered a concussion just a few minutes earlier, and that could have caused a serious health problem for him. In fact, he did, but that's another story. The love triangle between Kane, Lita, and Snitsky is one of the worst love triangles in wrestling history. Yes, to himself in every sense of the word. Both Snitsky and Kane were extremely cold characters, and never either of them. He would be seen as extremely in love and much less even a bit romantic with Lita. However, that's not the reason why this story seems unreal. Lita was supposed to already be pregnant, however, she kept interfering in the matches and putting her body at risk. This made the fans immediately suspect that all of this was fake. Well, Lita actually ended up having Kane fall on top of her in the middle of the ring at one point. All of this happened after a chair shot from Snitsky. It was said that after that fall with Kane, Lita lost the baby and had to have an abortion. Unfortunately, by that point the fans didn't believe in anything anymore. Even less so when Snitsky pretended to show up with a baby in his arms and threw it into the crowd, harassing Lita over the loss of the baby. If this had been real, WWE would never have allowed them to mock a superstar for losing their child. But that would be just one of the taunts, since the mockery towards Lita over the loss of her baby would be everywhere. And honestly, the fans felt this story was very artificial. Post WrestleMania 20, Big Show and Kurt Angle would enter into a direct feud on the SmackDown show. At that time, Big Show had a character with a very bad temper. It was made up that Big Show was undergoing medical treatment to deal with his frustration and bad temper. That's how he intended to take it out on anyone. Unfortunately for her, she ran into Tori Wilson and followed her all around the arena. She even completely wrecked her car and ended up flipping it over in the parking lot. Then, Big Show went up to a balcony to throw Tori Wilson off, and Kurt Angle begged him not to do it. That's how, after a while, Big Show grabbed Kurt Angle by the neck and ended up hitting him with a super claw from about 4 or 5 meters high. Obviously, the camera didn't show Kurt right away, but then we saw him lying on the floor with blood around him. It's impossible for anyone to survive from such a height, especially if they land headfirst on concrete. However, the fans wanted to give this segment a chance. But everything would fall apart when Kurt Angle would soon appear on SmackDown as the general manager. In fact, before the end of that same year, the year 2004, Kurt Angle was already back wrestling in the ring. The real reason for this story was that Kurt suffered a neck injury, and this injury was supposed to keep him out of the ring as a wrestler. On February 24, 2000, Kane faced Chris Benoit on another episode of SmackDown. During the match, Tori appeared, and instead of just distracting Kane, she took the opportunity to give Paul Bearer a big slap. Chris Benoit came to Tori's defense, but the big red monster showed up to defend his father, Tori. He climbed faster and faster to reach the top of the stage. It was at that moment that X-Pac appeared with a shocking flamethrower. Everyone thought he would only use it to threaten and scare Kane, but that wasn't the case. He threw fire in Kane's face and the whole arena was pretty shocked. Well, in the 2000s nobody could believe what they were seeing, and Kane had to be attended to quickly to check the condition of his face. However, X-Pac and Tori were left laughing and looked pretty satisfied with what they had done. This was one of the most ambitious storyline attempts in WWE history, and it was none other than a fake murder. Not a single fan was convinced that Vince McMahon was actually dead, since, to begin with, something so cruel wouldn't be shown on television. Well, it would be something tragic and hard to digest through the screen. It was a strange twist for WWE, since they wanted to take a risk and do something different from what they had been showing in those years. However, this didn't work. The tragedy of Chris Benoit caused this storyline to not continue, since Vince McMahon, who was supposed to be dead after the limousine explosion, had to come out to the ring to talk about the Canadians' deaths. Although, in reality, not a single fan believed that Vince had lost his life and ended up burned inside the limo. So maybe it was for the best not to continue with this fake storyline. May 23rd, 1999. Wrestling fans would witness live a moment that would leave everyone shocked. And believe me, that's how it is. Owen Hart would lose his life in the ring that night. At a live event broadcast via satellite to the whole world, Owen Hart was playing his character Blue Blazer, which was a masked superhero. WWE told him that day he had to appear flying, attached to a harness from 25 meters high. He immediately refused because he had been terrified of heights his whole life. The company told him he couldn't say no because practically everything was already set up. That's how Owen Hart fell from 25 meters onto the ring, hit his head on the turnbuckle, and received immediate help from the medical staff. Although the moment was live, his fall was not broadcast on television, since at that moment a recorded interview with him was being shown. Owen Hart. The atmosphere in the arena was just silence. Later, the same commentators would announce that Owen Hart had lost his life on the way to the hospital, leaving the entire arena in shock and a lump in the throat of the WWE staff themselves. The mistake that is still criticized to this day is that WWE decided to continue with the event until the end, knowing that Owen Hart was no longer alive. In fact, in the matches that continued afterward, you can even see blood stains on the ring mat.